Happy Canada Day, YouTube. Haven't done much today, but tell me the last day I really did much at all. Anyways, it's been a glorious last number of weeks since the pool opened, and the weather's really started to heat up lately. Starting tomorrow, for 8 days in a row, or at least as long as my phone can come up with the latest forecast anyways, maybe longer, it's all going to be 30 degrees or higher for over the next week starting tomorrow. So the pool is going to be hopefully ramping up to a nice comfortable temperature. It's in the mid 70s right now, which is fine for me. But yeah, it's just, and I've been doing lots of yard work, clearing out dead trees and stuff, so which I was doing again today, which made it feel even more like Canada Day, because we do have lots of trees here, for those of you who aren't familiar with Canada. But anyways, in and amongst all of the outdoor activity which I do, I pretty much put in an 8-hour, 9-hour work day in the backyard these days. Swimming, chores, reading, all that sort of stuff. It's like my work day now is just being out in the backyard. So it's thank you for the government of Canada for helping that to happen through all of the response benefit packages. So like I said, amongst all of that stuff, I have gotten more stuff done in the meantime. First up, my third outdoor book was finished about a week ago. It is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I read these books, these classic literature books, in the order I thought I would like them from least to most, and it looks like it's pretty much going to end out just how I thought it would, because I'm in the middle of the fourth one right now, and it's by far my favorite. So it started off with the Edgar Allan Poe collection, and then Gulliver's Travels, and then Frankenstein was the third. And I was very curious to read this book, because I'd always heard that, you know, the Frankenstein you see in movies where it's, you know, you have the mad doctor in the big castle with the hunchback assistant and the lightning striking everything. I've always heard that those stories were greatly exaggerated from the original, and so I wanted to find out for myself, and it's true. This original version of Frankenstein, so it starts off with some correspondence between this guy named R. Walton and his sister, or his wife, I can't remember, whose name I think was Margaret. He's a guy who wants to be a great explorer, so he takes a ship full of men out to Russia, and as they're getting into some dangerous territory out in the ice and stuff, they view from far away two figures in a row out on sledges pulled by dogs. The first one is like a really big fellow who they think, oh my god, that guy's huge. But he gets away. They try to hail him, but he gets away. The second guy they do get a hold of, and it's this guy who's just on the verge of death and collapse. So Walton takes him on, nurses him back to health, and they find that they have much in common. So they have a lot to talk about. They become good friends as this fellow they've taken on, whose name is Victor Frankenstein, relates his tale of horror to Walton. So basically, Victor Frankenstein grew up in Geneva, Switzerland with his family as a youngster, led a pretty secluded lifestyle. They lived at a cottage, and he did go to school, but for the most part he was, you know, with his family out in the wilderness in the cottage. And eventually he got an adopted sister named Elizabeth, who was, I guess, dubbed his cousin, and they were eventually to be arranged as a marriage or whatever. And then eventually he also got two younger brothers as time kind of passed. But to get him more worldly and stuff, his father thought he should go to university, so he went to Ingolstadt, which I'm not sure where that is. But that is where he went, and Frankenstein was a person who loved knowledge for knowledge's sake, the pursuit of knowledge, and his main focus, he loved the physical world and what made things work, sort of thing. So that was his passion. And as he got to university and began studies and got onto some authors on certain veins of study, he became obsessed with creating life, creating a person, and then imbuing the body, the vessel, with life. So as he got absorbed in this task, he became sickly and pale and frail, and it consumed all of his waking moments. And eventually he met with success, and one day this creature he'd been building for so long, boom, it was alive. Much to Frankenstein's dismay, though, this thing was a giant, hulking, scary beast that Frankenstein, without even talking to this thing, he abhorred it and fled the scene. And he's like, "What did I do? I wasted all this time. I'm not in my right mind anymore, and this is what I got out of it. I created this brute." So, as he's fleeing his home, he ends up in the streets and finds that his best friend from school, Henry Clerval, had actually come to Ingolstadt to study himself. So he sees Henry, and they're like, "Oh my God, I haven't seen you in so long. I haven't written in so long. Let's go hang out at my pad." And he's like, "Let me just run up and make sure everything's tidy first," like on the guise of like, I just got to see if this stupid monster is still here. But the monster had fled in the meantime. So Frankenstein was like, "Okay, cool. Let's come up. We'll have some snacks and whatever. We'll hang out, catch up." And so as that happens, afterwards, Frankenstein changes the subject of his studies to align more with Henry's, and the two of them study together at university. And Frankenstein kind of puts that whole experiment of his kind of on the back of his mind. He kind of forgets about it and gets on with life in a more happy kind of note after. But eventually he gets some correspondence from home saying that one of his little brothers, William, was murdered, and so his family wants him to come home to go to the funeral and all that stuff. And the perpetrator of the crime is another kind of girl that was adopted into their family named Justine. And everybody's like, "Justine didn't do this. She couldn't do this. She loved it. She brought him up as a child, and all this stuff." And Frankenstein's like, "No, she didn't do it. I know who did it. It's that stupid monster I made." And so he gets home, and he tries as hard as he can to get Justine off on these charges, but he can't relate the truth of what he'd done and what his suspicions were, fearing the repercussions, or in the first place that anybody would even believe that he made such a monster. So eventually things go on. Justine is tried. She's determined to be guilty. She is hung. She's dead. So that's two of his family members that have now perished. And eventually the monster makes himself known to Frankenstein and relates a tale of how when he fled Frankenstein's flat after he was given life, he was full of wonder and innocence, and he wasn't a monster. He just wanted to be loved. And seeing the first reaction from Frankenstein didn't set him off on the right path, but he traveled and eventually ended up in what I believe maybe Germany, and spied on this family that lived in this cottage, but was afraid to make himself known to them, fearing what would happen with Frankenstein would happen with them. And but he became to love these people as he kind of spied on them, and he helped them out unknowingly. And when eventually he did reveal themselves to him, they took him for a monster and fought him and then fled the scene, and then came back and just moved away. So all of these experiences that the monster had kind of gotten from humanity turned him more towards evil and violence, and that's when he killed William in an effort to get at Frankenstein, and he wanted to make Frankenstein's life hell for what Frankenstein had done to him. So eventually, after this big speech is given, the monster asks Frankenstein, he says, "You just do me one solid, and I'll leave all your family alone, and I'll leave for the poles, and society will never see me again." And what he wants Frankenstein to do is create a woman of his kind that he can share his life with. Somebody who will understand him and not be afraid of him and that sort of thing. So Frankenstein, fearing for his family's safety, is like, "Okay, I'll do it." So him and Henry travel to England and then on to Scotland, where Frankenstein kind of goes into seclusion and starts building this monster. But time goes by and he just can't bring himself to do it, and finally says, "No, I can't do it. What if this monster is just ultimately evil and doesn't like you anyways, and now I've got these two evil monsters that I've released on society?" So he's like, "No, I'm not doing it." So then the monster's like, "Okay then." So then Henry turns up dead, and Victor almost gets framed for the murder, and then he returns to his home with now 3 people as the body count, and he then gets married to Elizabeth soon after, but then the monster gets at Elizabeth and kills her. So Frankenstein's monster comes back to bite him in the ass, and kills basically everybody he loves. So with everybody being gone and dead, he vows the one last thing to do before he dies will be to hunt this monster down and destroy it, so he can't perpetrate these evils on anybody else. And that's when Walton on his ship picks Victor Frankenstein up, when he's in the middle of this quest still to kill the monster on this Arctic shelf, right? So, and then there's one last little scene where Frankenstein's monster has an interaction with Walton and brings some sort of closure to the story, but also leaves a little bit open, sort of thing. So, but a great book. I'm glad to have read it and kind of gotten a gist of Frankenstein's kind of origin story, because, like I said, I'd always heard over the years that all the different Frankenstein references we see in movies and stuff like that are always way off base from the original. They've been, embellished and changed and whatever. So, so it's cool to finally read that. Next up, my next inside book is complete, and it is the second book of the Dragonwatch series called Wrath of the Dragon King, I think. Yeah, Wrath of the Dragon King. So, Seth and Kendra Sorensen, the caretakers of Worm Roost Sanctuary, where the dragons are pent up so they can't destroy society, have, in the first book, have kind of defied Celebrant, who is a co-caretaker of Worm Roost and also the king of the dragons, and have greatly offended him and set themselves up on kind of a tumultuous path going forward. So soon into this book, they get sent an invitation to come to the Feast of Welcome. So once a year, Celebrant, the king of the dragons, is able to host a party for the caretakers of Wormroost, as well as the heads of all the other factions that live within Wormroost, like the Fair Folk, there's Talking Animals, there's a bunch of other ones too. So all the heads of these clans also are at the feast. So they know it's probably a trap, and they know it's probably going to be dangerous, but to not go to the feast would weaken their position somewhat as standing up to Celebrant. So they're like, okay, we'll go and just be prepared for anything. So Seth, Kendra, the Potion Master Tanu, and the little tiny Nipsey Calvin go to Skyhold Castle, where Celebrant rules, and attend the Feast of Welcome. The feast part of it goes okay, but as soon as the feast is over, Celebrant addresses the assembled crowd and says, "We're officially declaring war on the caretakers of Wormroost. Soaring Cliff's sanctuary has already fallen to the dragons, and soon you're going to be next, and dragons will be unleashed on the world." So Seth and Kendra and all the other heads of the factions are like, oh crap. So Celebrant also informs them that the griffins that brought Seth and Kendra and their allies to the castle have unfortunately met with accidents and are dead. So if they want to return home, they'll have to take the road back to the stronghold, which will take them much longer, of course. The road offers magical protections, but if they are to deviate at any point from the road, they are fair game to anybody who can get at them, and of course the dragons will be watching, of course, because this is all one big setup. The other wild card going on at this time is that it just so happens that the feast falls on the night of a festival night. Festival nights occur 4 times during the year on the solstices, and on a festival night, all barriers within the sanctuary kind of fall, and all the beings are able to freely go wherever they want and do whatever they want. So it usually ends up as a chaotic, violent, terror-filled night that the kids definitely do not want to be caught up in. So they begin the trek home on the road, but the dragons have placed some barriers there and whatnot, so they soon get confronted. They get split up. Kendra gets taken away by one of Celebrant's lieutenants and flown back to Skyhold Castle, and she's being held hostage there. And there she meets the dark unicorn named Ronondin, something like that, and he turns out to be a bit of a prick. And Seth, in the meantime, gets allied with Eve, who is the daughter of Dalgarel, who is the leader of the Fair Folk, who have always maintained neutrality in everything within the sanctuary and such. She and Seth work together to evade the dragons for as long as they can, until a being called the Somber Knight, who Seth and Kendra have dealt with before, shows up and kills the dragon that's after Seth, and then he kills another one. He is their biggest probably ally within the sanctuary in terms of directly standing up to the dragons. So Seth tells the Somber Knight that Celebrant has declared war, and all that went down at the Feast of Welcome, and the Somber Knight's like, oh, no. Celebrant has given up his claim on being a caretaker of Wyrmroost by doing this, by so openly defying the true caretakers and declaring war and all that stuff. So I'm going to go to the castle and I'm going to tell him that he's no longer a caretaker, and I may die by doing so, but I'm going to do it. So he goes there, and in the process of addressing Celebrant, a big brouhaha erupts, and Celebrant's son, the dragon Raxtus, who has always been friendly to Seth and Kendra, helps Kendra get out of there and takes off with her and gets her to freedom. She can't get back to the stronghold, the keep, but she does get to the safety of the faction of the talking animals. So, and there she is brought to their leadership. Seth and Eve and Tanu, meanwhile, end up going back to the Fair Folks' territory, and once there, they're kind of taken captive, but not really, because the leader of the Fair Folk, Dalgarel, he understands that they need to stand up to the dragons, but the policy of the Fair Folk has always been neutrality, so he wants to fight, but he can't, sort of thing. So he has this kind of loose policy with prisoners that they're kind of allowed to do whatever and can basically escape anytime they want. So soon enough after that, they find out that there is they heard of a castle within the sanctuary called Stormguard Castle, which has apparently been super haunted for hundreds of years. Anybody who ever goes there never comes out. So they find out that there is a fabled object within this castle called the Wizen Stone, which, if claimed, could definitely defeat the dragons and help Seth and Kendra avert total disaster with the dragons getting free and trying to take over the world. So Seth and his allies plan an escape from the Fairfolk territory and meet up with Kendra. They visit this fairy who can afford them some helps in getting to Stormguard at the right time and being protected on the way. And eventually they get to Stormguard Castle and are in a race basically to get the Wizen Stone, because Celebrant also knows about it, and him and his two top lieutenants are going there to get it as well. So and within Stormguard Castle we find out that it's basically this kind of it's almost like an escape room kind of, that's this big puzzle that's been set up by this troll in order to claim the Wizen Stone. So they have to kind of outsmart the dragons in order to claim this Wizen Stone and hopefully avert disaster. And when you enter Stormguard Castle, anybody who enters it, any magical properties or abilities they have are stripped from them. They're just a basic, all you got is what you got sort of thing. So they're a little more on even footing with the dragons than they normally would be. So yeah, so it's basically just this competition to get the Wizen Stone and hopefully save the world. So but of course there's lots of twists and turns along the way, and nothing goes quite as planned, setting up what will be, I'm sure, an outstanding third volume of the series. Brandon Mull is he's got maybe 4, 5, 6 really good series out now. That all started with Fablehaven. Those are the ones I first started reading, which this is an expansion of, and they're all really good books. The series are all they're all magical and stuff like that, and different, but they're all very their own adventures sort of thing. So he really knows how to write a good book that just keeps you turning the pages and you just fly through like that. Next up, finally got around to watching Joker. This movie was outstanding. I know DC's had some troubles with movies recently, especially compared to how well Marvel's doing, but I've really thought that they've had some good ones lately. I thought Shazam was really good. I really thought Aquaman was amazing. But this is probably the best one since like the last set of Batman movies. It's you know, it's more of a prequel, just showing how Joker became Joker and ended up being kind of the king, the clown prince of crime in Gotham. So it's kind of, it takes place in the early 80s, and Gotham City is, as usual, a cesspool of crime and despair and just filth and mental illness and such. And Thomas Wayne, Bruce Wayne's father, has announced that he's going to start running for mayor to try and clean things up. The main character of the story, though, is Arthur Fleck, who lives in a slum of an apartment with his mother Penny, and they're on the knife's edge of poverty kind of thing. He aspires to be a stand-up comedian, but currently works as like a clown for hire sort of thing. And so one little disaster will put him and his mother over the edge sort of thing, right? So as he's going about his life, he suffers some misfortunes. He one day, his current gig as a clown, he's promoting a going out of business sale, I think, at a store or something like that, where a group of young street punks jump him and kick the crap out of him. After he goes back to his employers, one of his guys that he works with gives him a gun, and Arthur takes it somewhat reluctantly, you know, in order for protection sort of thing. After that, he finds out, you know, that the social worker he goes to, because he has some mental issues, many mental issues, she helps counsel him and also gives him all of his medications. So he finds out that due to funding cuts, that service is no longer going to be available to him. And of his many mental illnesses, one of them is a propensity to laugh when he's uncomfortable. So, and he's got quite a laugh. And then the next kind of misfortune he suffers is that on his next gig at a children's hospital, clowning around to cheer the kids up, the gun that he took from his coworker slips out of his pants leg, and everybody sees it. And afterwards, his boss fires him for that kind of transgression. So he's just, you know, he's kind of at the bottom of the well at this point, right? Like nothing much else can go wrong. Well, that's where you're wrong. On the subway ride home, three kind of pretentious young pricks are kind of harassing this young lady on the train, and they give up on her after a while, and then set their sights on Arthur and the laughing clown, as it is. So eventually, after kind of talking to him for a little bit, they start to kick the crap out of him, just like the street punks did, and he goes off and shoots them all dead. So afterwards, he's like, uh-oh. He flees the scene and goes back to the apartment. And over the next little while, he kind of notices how news of this incident is taken. These three men were employees of Wayne Enterprises, and all of the affluent people of the city thought of this incident as a shock and a crime, and somebody has to pay for this. Whereas all the downtrodden people like Arthur, hearing that it was a clown that fled the scene, which made it even more gruesome, are all like, way to go, mysterious clown boy. You stood up to these, silver spoon pricks that just think they can walk all over us and not even notice us, other than to, kick us when we're down sort of thing. They kind of rally around this event and start calling on the city for more recognition of we're here. We may be poor, we may be not born into money and as well off as all you guys, but we're here and we're human, and our needs are just as great as yours are, right, sort of thing. So this becomes a rallying point for all these people, and Arthur is kind of chagrined to see this happen. So as time goes on, eventually he does a stand-up set at a local club, and it does not go well. And a guy, like a late night talk show named Murray, I forget his last name, but you know, he's like a kind of a Jay Leno, David Letterman kind of guy, Johnny Carson, whatever. He gets wind of this set of Arthur's and invites him on the show. And at first, Arthur is ecstatic because this guy's a hero of his, right? And but as time goes on, before he's set to appear on the show, he finally starts to realize, that this guy doesn't want me on because I'm funny. Like, he thinks I'm an idiot. He's having me on as a gag to probably make fun of me and such. So he goes on the show, and this is kind of where the movie culminates and is close to the ending. And so he has him on, and he sits in the chair. There's two other guests there, and they get talking. And eventually, as the conversation gets a little stressed with where Murray's taking it, Arthur admits, and he wants to be addressed as Joker before he comes out on the stage, FYI. And he admits to killing those three guys on the subway. And at first, everybody's like, ha ha ha. And then Murray's like, no, wait, he's serious. You're serious. And he's like, yeah. So then the crowd's like, oh. So then it gets real weird real fast. And then he goes on into this big speech about, exactly as I was talking about before, all these poor people that don't get just get kicked aside by the well-off, and it's time for them to have a say and have a voice and be noticed and get everything that everybody else gets, right? So eventually Murray, takes Arthur to task, and he's like, no, you have to pay for this, and you're an ass, basically. And that's when Arthur whips out his gun and executes Murray live on air, which sends everything into pandemonium. All the people in the TV set, of course, flee and are crazed, and afterwards the streets fill with people in clown masks. They start rioting, they start looting, they start attacking the cops, and it's just pandemonium. And Joker is caught by the police and is being taken to jail, but they drive through this rioting, and he is rescued by his people after the car crashes, and are kind of raised up like Lion King style sort of thing. Not quite, but as their kind of figurehead of all these people who are standing up for their rights and to be noticed. So now you can kind of see in this movie where Joker how he was birthed, and where obviously he probably had a good pool of disgruntled people to act as his henchmen should he want any henchmen, which we know he always does, right? So this movie was amazing. It was one of those, because it was like, it dealt with a lot of mental illness, and it was a little crazy and weird. It was one of those very slow moving movies, but it just gripped you the whole time. And then that last part of it, when he goes on the show, and afterwards when there's the riots and everything, it just wraps the movie up in just a perfect kind of whoa kind of way. And it's just, for any of you who haven't seen it yet, even if you don't like superhero movies, it's not a superhero movie. It's something else all entirely, and it's fantastic. Joaquin Phoenix did an amazing job. I wasn't sure at first when they cast him, like, what's he going to be like? But he was fantastic. He really made this movie, a masterpiece, in my opinion. So, gotta watch it. Next up, finished watching season 1 of Star Wars Resistance. This is another fantastic series. Like, first Clone Wars, then Rebels, and now Resistance. They just keep hitting on all cylinders with these Star Wars TV shows. This one happens just before Force Awakens and leading into it, sort of thing. So there's this, the main character is a guy named Kazuto Xiono, who is a New Republic pilot, and he gets caught up with Poe Dameron in a bit of an adventure in space and helps save his bacon. And Poe afterwards says, I like the cut of your jib, kid. I think you could be a Resistance agent. And Kaz is like, what? Poe Dameron? For sure. So he ends up being recruited by Poe, and Poe's like, I got a job for you. So Poe takes Kaz to this station that floats in the water on this ocean world of Castellan, I think its name is. And the station itself is called the Colossus. Poe says to Kaz, there's been some First Order stuff coming out of here, and we can't figure out what it is, so we want you to go undercover as a spy and ferret out who on this station is working for the First Order. So Kaz is like, okay. And Poe sets him up with a guy named Jarek Yeager, who owns a repair shop on the Colossus. And working for Yeager as well are mechanics Tam Tam Revora, and Niku. I forget his last name. Niku. Oh, it doesn't matter. And then also Yeager's temperamental droid, Bucket. So Poe loans Kaz BB-8 to help him out. And so as Kaz gets settled into life on the station, he kind of he has a few objectives in mind, I guess. First, be a spy and find out who's working for the First Order and help Poe and the Resistance. Second, ingratiate himself well with Jarek Yeager and his team, and play the part there as well. And third, the Colossus maintains a fleet of starfighter pilots called the Flying Aces. The Aces serve two purposes. First, they act as the main form of entertainment on the Colossus as they perform these aerial races that people bet on and such. And secondly, they're also the station's first line of defense against any outside threat. So Kaz, being an aspiring pilot himself and bragging as the best pilot in the galaxy, wants to become an ace and get in on this action. So that's kind of his other agenda item. And Yeager just so happens to have a starfighter that can fly in these races that Kaz really wants to get working and flying, sort of thing. So as the season goes on, Kaz gets caught up with a number of different people. Sayara is a girl that Kaz takes a shine to, but he doesn't really realize that she's working for some pirates that always end up attacking the station, and so that his relationship with her kind of influences things later on in the series or the season. He also gets to know some of the Flying Aces pilots, namely Tora Doza, who he also takes a shine to, and she just so happens to be the daughter of the captain of the station, Captain Doza. So there's an ex-Imperial that is one of the Flying Aces, and through Kaz's connections with Tora, he's able to get a little bit of spy session in on her father, the captain, and finds out that he's also an ex-Imperial. So he's got all these kind of leads going on, but he can't get anything concrete. And but eventually, the nature of the First Order presence is kind of revealed when, after the Colossus suffers one too many pirate attacks, Captain Doza, who has been in touch with the First Order, finally says, yes, we'd like your offer of protection. So that opens the floodgates for the First Order to come in and basically start taking over the station. At first there's a stormtrooper presence, but it's not all that heavy. But over time they bring in more and more troops, where the citizens are starting to get a bit antsy, and it's like you can't do anything without, you know what the Empire was like. You do one thing wrong and you're either arrested or you disappear. So eventually it gets so bad towards the end of the season that it turns into basically a full-on occupation, and Kaz has an idea of why the First Order wants the station, and as this occupation ramps up and communications are locked down, Kaz has to come up with a desperate plan to get help, and his plan is to sink the station, at least down a little bit, which will cause a big distraction and allow Kaz to get at the communications array while the First Order is distracted, and send a message to the Resistance saying what's going on and that we need help. We're basically locked down under full control here by the First Order. His message does get through, but he gets an immediate reply back from Leia Organa saying, I'm sorry, we'd love to help you, but our forces are already spread way too thin, we can't help you, but there's always help where you have allies, or whatever, or something like that. So Kaz has one last big plan to institute, and that is to basically free the station all by himself with the help of his few allies on the station. So and as Kaz is going through this last plan, of course he has the help of Yeager, Bucket. BB-8 has since departed with Poe, but he gets a new rolly droid named CB-23, so he's got CB-23. Tora helps him, and as this last plan is unfolding and they're trying to shake the First Order off the station and escape, after discovering the station can also fly, Kaz witnesses the First Order activate Starkiller Base and fire all those shots out that destroyed all the planets that we see in The Force Awakens. So it kind of ties right directly into that moment in The Force Awakens. And one of the planets that is destroyed is where the New Republic is seated at the time, Hosnian Prime, and which is also Kaz's home planet. So that's kind of where the season ends off, as the First Order destroys those planets, and just as Kaz does good on this plan and helps the station escape from the First Order. So it's left on kind of an Empire Strikes Back-ish kind of cliffhanger for the next season, right? Fantastic show, full of suspense, full of classic Star Wars action, lots of humor. I really love the Rolly droids. BB-8's fantastic, and when he left, I was like, oh no, BB-8. But then CB-23 came in and was just as hilarious. So I love all that. And the animation is very different in this series. And at first, I didn't think I was going to like it. I was like, that looks weird. But it only took a few episodes to become very used to it and very much a fan of it. So I know there's only been 2 seasons released so far. I think the second season has already played out originally in terms of its original air dates. So I hope at some point in the near future they will have a second volume, DVD volume for that second season, because I really want to see where things go from here. So last thing, finished this game on the PS3 recently. Just one that I saw at Game Cycle for, when I took the price tag off, probably $3 or $4, and thought that looks cool. And it is Bulletstorm. Let me tell you, this is one of the best surprise purchases I've ever made. This game is outstanding. It's a first-person shooter. It takes place like in the 26th century or something like that, when all the planets of the galaxy are ruled over by this one governing body, and we're introduced to a man named Grayson Hunt, who commands this squadron of special forces fighters named Dead Echo, and they ultimately work under a loudmouthed general named Serrano. He basically has them making hits on people that are detrimental to the government, people that are, you know, whistleblowers or agents against them, I don't know, spies, whatever, whoever. But it turns out Grayson Hunt eventually finds out that the last hit they did for this guy was actually just a civilian reporter who was trying to report on all the wrongs Serrano had done. So Grayson and his squadron realized that, you know, we've been dupes for Serrano this whole time. We've been killing innocents, thinking that we're killing bad guys and such. So they totally cut off Serrano and kind of spend the next 10 years as like kind of pirates and stuff, just floating through the galaxy and trying to get by, right? But one day they come face to face with Serrano's big ship, the Ulysses, over the planet of Stygia. And being a little bit drunk at the time, Grayson's like, let's ram this prick. And so they drive their ship into the Ulysses. They all come crashing down to the planet. And in the aftermath, basically Gray's whole squadron is killed outside of his best friend Ishii, who was injured in the fracas, and they were able to get him some cybernetic implants in the meantime. So it's the two of them basically taking on the world of Stygia and whatever's left of Serrano's troops. So Stygia itself, the world, was a place that I guess was used as training grounds for some other squadrons, and also as kind of a vacation planet. And due to some radiation, though, some real freaks of nature had been birthed in the underbelly of the city, some mutants and such. So you basically are fighting a whole bunch of weird mutant creatures as you make your way through this world, and as well as eventually Serrano's forces as you get closer to the wreckage of the Ulysses, as Gray, he's okay with dying, but he wants to take Serrano with him. So you have to make your way across Stygia to the Ulysses and hopefully Serrano and kill him. Along the way, you meet a girl named Trishka, who is actually the daughter of your last hit that you did, the civilian reporter. So she's trying to find Serrano because she wants to rescue him, because she's still under the impression that he's a good guy. And you kind of tell her, no, he's not. And eventually, as you make your way through the game, you're on this kind of tentative alliance with her, and in the end the truth is revealed that you actually killed her father, but that you were under trickery from Serrano. So everything kind of rights itself in the end as you confront him, and that's kind of where the game ends in your final battle with Serrano, which goes well enough, but not quite well enough, because the game ends on this kind of cliffhanger, excuse me, revealing that Serrano survived your attempt to kill him, and kind of sets things up for a future feature in this story. So afterwards I googled, like, is there a Bulletstorm 2? And there isn't. So but there is, from what I read online, there is rumblings that there is one in the works for some time in the future, because it sounds like a lot of people like this game. So it's it was a real easy game to play. The story was great, the graphics were great, the gameplay was great, and it was one of those games, like, unlike Fortnite, where you have such a complicated system of weaponry and traps and blueprints and upgrades and crafting. I hate all that shit, as much as I do enjoy Fortnite at times. And that's why I don't play Minecraft. You gotta get all these fucking resources and craft. You spend all your time trying to figure out how to get all this stuff and craft all this stuff. It's like, I just want to play a game. I just want to shoot people and challenge myself. I don't want to be making recipes for weapons and bullets and stuff. So this game has a real easy weapon system. You acquire a bunch of different guns and such over the course of the game, and you can pick up other weapons on the ground to replenish your ammo, or there's little depots, kind of things. You'll know what I mean if you play it, that you can kind of link into with your. You have this weird whip thing that is electronic and can attach you to certain things, and using that you can use these little depots to buy ammo from all the XP you earn from your skill shots when you kill people and stuff. So it's got a very easygoing, easy to master way to play it, and weapons system and stuff. And so the whole thing, the game just flew by. Like, it was so much fun, and it's not a super long game, but it's also not a short game. So it's a pretty quick and easy adventure to play through. And there is a secondary mode that basically just rehashes some of the places you've visited in the story mode in these kind of speedrun things, which usually I don't like that kind of stuff, but this game, they even made that fun. So I played the whole thing right till the end. So if you haven't played that, I highly recommend it, and you can get it for super cheap now, obviously. And here's to hoping that they make a sequel in the near future. PS4 it up, baby. Have a great day.